I'm Jared Frederici. So, gosh, I've been with the Poirier Group here for quite a while, working on my 12th year, and industrial systems engineer in terms of trade and background. Spent a lot of years in a lot of different industries. And with Poirier Group here, gosh, we've done about 400 projects, maybe a bit more. I've had a chance to either lead or be a part of those. And a really good percentage of those have been in some element of supply chain across a lot of different industries. So I've had a good chance to see a lot of different things across a lot of different industries. So really appreciate the opportunity to give you my take on a few things and some of the things we're seeing, and some of the cutting edge or bleeding edge things, and also some of the get back to basics things that I think we need to, and perhaps the pandemic exposed about some of our supply chains. I think in terms of going back to Jim's previous webinar, there are new normals that are forming. I think people are preparing, whether or not it comes or not, people are preparing for that. And I think that it's had implications for our supply chains, no doubt, and you're feeling and you're living those, especially around, third-party logistics 3PL organizations or service organizations, certainly seeing a ton of complexity, a ton of new players, a ton of density in the industry, and also the ability and exposure of our ability to evaluate and assess vendors in the context of especially supporting our e-commerce ecosystem. So it has stressed and put some of our upstream systems under duress in terms of our ability to leverage support in that way, or need support in that way. Most certainly, and we'll talk sort of one of the bigger pieces here is costs have been going up, not only just transportation, but broader, especially within the four walls, but all supply chain costs have been going up. And there's a lot of drivers of that, especially globally, socioeconomically, et cetera. But so what is our new cost structure here? Can we still be profitable? How do we budget? And that's a big concern that a lot of supply chain leaders are seeing, because they're getting pressure from their bosses, from boards, from private equity organizations, et cetera. We've got a lot of new technologies juxtaposed to that we're evaluating and seeing, are they practical? Is the business case there? Does it sound really cool? It's really not implementable. So I think that we're facing challenges on what to do with some of those things. And everybody's talking about visibility. So how can we see what's happening here? How can we plan and do scenario modeling dynamically, or in some cases have scenario modeling done for us dynamically to predict and ultimately, in some cases, autonomously fix things that might be detected as failures. So I think that based on where you're at, one, we need to establish where you're at on relative maturity of your supply chain. And I think as industrial engineers, as supply chain professionals, we have to be equipped to make interventions at different moments in the end-to-end supply chain with the right tool at the right time, with the right business case, and deployed in the right way so that it sticks. In some cases, getting back to basics. So I think that's what I'm seeing. We did talk about this in the previous webinar in terms of transportation. And I think there may have been some relief on the ocean freight and port backlog side, but some of what we're seeing is the long-term bullwhip ripple effect of, especially on the manufacturing side, and especially imports. So I think a lot of us are feeling that, especially in the manufacturing sector, and that in its downstream impact. Certainly, the spot market, being able to get carriers lined up in a way that can serve our organizations, but not at costs that are prohibitive, or even forcing us to do air freight because it's cheaper. I think we're still dealing with some of those, some relief, but still the spot market is quite varied across the board. And that also is the same for air freight. But I think that as people and passenger volume goes up, we're maybe seeing a little bit of relief there, but I think we're feeling the effects now versus seeing new instances of it. So it's that sort of instance versus when do we feel it. So I think that this is probably not a lot of new information, but I think we're starting to feel it, and the ripple effects on especially our manufacturing value chains are quite significant in terms of dealing with and predicting variance in our manufacturing units. So in terms of so how do we make interventions here? And how do I know, there's a lot of different models out there. And I don't think that, we can also often romanticize different models, but, being able to look at different elements and attributes of your supply chain and find out, how we doing, 1 through 5, and we'll talk through Bloom's taxonomy here on the next slide here, but just having a real simple model. There's a lot out there. And so finding one that makes sense for the attributes of your organization and just having a quick pulse check on where we're at on these different elements left to right, but also how we do against those with regard to managing data or doing analytics or managing our processes, et cetera. So getting a baseline is important. And I think when we talk about that baseline, 1 through 5, what is a 1 or what is a 5? I think ironically, predictive number 4 here, sort of that 4th stage of Bloom's taxonomy or maturity, not so long ago was the highest stage. We are starting to see prescient systems arise that, largely digital supply chains running that have high degrees of accuracy, and leveraging some advanced tools can make automatic, based on a set of business rules, interventions to your supply chain automatically without human intervention, to not only detect failures, but to make an intervention because the prediction is 98% accurate and we're going to need to do something anyway. So we are seeing some digital ecosystems that run. And so this prescient notion here is pretty fascinating. So when you look at 1 through 5 and assessing those various elements, think of this in terms of the scale. And so I think that sets up, how we think about these various maturities and therefore what interventions we make. Like, if we look at just a very simple flow here, for those maybe relatively new to supply chain, like to Jim's point, my mom for the first time said, "Oh, supply chain, I actually heard about that on the news." And I think that was the only time she's known what exactly we do. But I think we're all starting to get a bit familiar with, the flow of goods, but I think there's lots of different supply chains. When we look at some of the failure modes and where we need to make interventions, I think you can see that we're addressing inventory management. So what and where does it go and how much do we make? We're looking at the ability to manage and scenario plan a network and store things and know where things need to be located and what cities or states or countries. We need to get really great at transportation and how do we pack things out? So these are the different areas within that overall value chain that we're looking at, and often have multiple parallel projects to extract cost out or delivery, et cetera. So I think, retail and supply chain here is a fairly traditional. I think it makes up a good bit as a percentage of our supply chains, but we often also have service-related supply chains. I think that we can forget that. So, classic retail or manufacturing supply chain portrayed here, and the flow is fairly straightforward. And often the critical success factors there is, visibility, flow, and how can we forecast given the lots of volatility in different affinity groups of our SKU set. But when you look at services, it's a bit of a different chain. Oftentimes we're developing services and really understanding user requirements at the front end, right? We have to do a great job at assessing capacity, skills, leveraging third-party contracts management. Up front, we got to procure assets and do often QC beta. So when you think of, IT organizations are deploying a marketing product, something that's digital or something that might not be a tangible product, we forget we have supply chains and value chains baked into those organizations as well. And ultimately deploying this to the customer and working to get better and sort of predict capacity. And so I think that with service supply chains, getting the integration of people and how they interact with various technologies and their various capacities is quite critical there as compared to more product oriented. So I think, moving into, we want to do some deep dives of, okay, show me how we've made some interventions. What are some things just to inspire you? Some interventions at various moments in the end-to-end chain where we can leverage some tools to help out, to find some cost reductions, to improve flow, et cetera. This was a case that we did, and I think it's a case a lot of you see, is that on the chart here, one isolated distribution center, percentage of cost as a percentage of sales. So cost as a percentage of sales for a distribution center, for transportation costs or supply chains, is an often critical metric. So where are we at? You can see the spike in this case. A lot of organizations, late 20, early 21, as a result of the global pandemic, started to see significant rises in costs. And they're in a position now where CEOs, boards are saying, how can I budget for next year? Are we going to go back to our similar cost structure? What's the new normal? So I think that, this is an example where, we've said, okay, this is the bridge, or this is the waterfall between where you were at pre-pandemic. These are the things that weren't controllable. This is the rise in labor costs, for example. This is the rise potentially in a new facility or in your product costs and packaging costs. This is the bridge of what's not controllable that we would expect, and this is what is controllable. And so I think that, and we've got some benchmarks here for this particular industry, but I think everyone here is feeling, what do we budget for? What's available to us in terms of process improvements? And so I think this sort of sets the stage of what a lot of leaders are facing, what a lot of you are facing. So what's possible for us in our given facilities and broader supply chains?